Good afternoon, Bills Mafia. The red light is on, which means we are live. Now, you were probably expecting a three-person panel. That panel has now turned into four with some different faces. So, first and foremost, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review at 12 o'clock this week instead of 11. We will be going back to regular scheduled programming next week. My name is Joe DeRosa. You can find me on Twitter at show_DeRosa. And joining me today is, as always, a stacked panel of guests, all from the Cover One Network. You know their faces. You love their faces. They are some beautiful, handsome faces, objectively speaking. So, gentlemen, I'm going to go around the panel and give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and plug whatever you have going on, starting with you, Mike, going to Thomas and Judge. What do you got for the people today?
Hey, guys. You can follow me, Mike_Bunt. Not a ton going on right now. It's the post-draft period, which is going to be a little bit quiet, but as always, Going Deep podcast every Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. Me and Kevin Masseri always welcome anyone who wants to join us. So that's about all that we really have going on at the moment.
What's going on, everybody? Thomas DeLoss. You can find me at the Thomas DeLoss on Twitter. My show, Buffalo Late Night, every Thursday nights at 9 p.m. This week is at 8 p.m. We're actually doing a Cover One Buffalo Late Night schedule release show. We're going to be having Joe DeRosa, Greg Tomsett, and Nate Geary, Bruce Nolan, whole hodgepodge of human beings. So should be a lot of fun, and look forward to seeing you guys all Thursday.
Judge Mathis, you can find me on the Air Raid Hour every Monday night, 9 p.m. with my co-host, Dave Tilton. Yeah, as Mike said, it's kind of that part of the offseason. I know tomorrow we're just going to be psychoanalyzing and analyzing all of Josh Allen's wardrobe from the Kentucky Derby this weekend. Just kidding. We'll actually be putting the AFC East under review this week on the Air Raid Hour and talking about the Buffalo Bills divisional opponents. But you can catch us 9 p.m. Monday night here on the Cover One Sports Network.
Awesome. And again, yeah, gentlemen, thank you boys so much for joining me today. Mike, we've had this in the works. Judge and Thomas, they picked it up last second to join me today on a Saturday at noon. That is admirable. So you guys have my eternal respect. I would go to war with any of you any day. Speaking of going to war, let's go into the subject, because this was a turbulent week in the world of the Buffalo Bills. Obviously, goes without saying that the draft has created some rifts and opinions, but ultimately, from my personal opinion, I enjoyed the picks they made. I thought we had a pretty solid draft. Needs were addressed. There's been a lot of excitement as far as the direction of both sides of the ball with this team. I definitely want to talk about that today. I also want to talk about a couple of our free agency signings, because, I mean, we all speculated that the Bills were going to beef up at some point, and boy, did they, with the addition of Poona Ford. You added Latavius Murray to be what could be seen as maybe your running back 4, or maybe competing for the power back role. And then, of course, the Bills' new stadium is underway, and I think that's exciting news. And I think when we close the show out today, I'd love to just give some thoughts on that and, you know, kind of what our outlook is for building a new stadium in Orchard Park, which I think is fantastic. So let's get started here today and talk about our draft. So obviously, Bean did some maneuvering, some manipulation, some trading up and down. And not only did we wind up picking with 6 picks this year, which is, you know, what we expected, although not in the most conventional way, he also loaded up next year's draft, which is something that I think when we're discussing about some of the moves he made this year, we got to acknowledge that, because that was, in my opinion, going into the low rounds and being able to walk away with more capital next year in a draft that would be considered better is exciting for me. So before we get into our specific picks, I'm going to go around the panel and ask you guys, what was your just general opinion of the draft as a whole? How do you think Bean did? And Mike, I'm going to start with you. We'll go around.
Yeah, I thought it was a solid draft. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk around Buffalo lately regarding a few of the picks. Obviously, Dorian Williams being the most controversial of their 6 picks. And then the whole tight end wide receiver controversy with Dalton Kincaid, which I think is the dumbest thing in the history of talking about Bills draft picks. But overall, I think they hit on a lot of their main objectives. Going into this draft, a lot of people wanted them to attack the O-line, improve in the interior. You do that with Osiris Torrence. Many people wanted a weapon in the passing game, albeit it's not a wide receiver, but you got maybe one of the best pass-catching weapons of the entire draft, and someone that many people mocked in the top 15 in Dalton Kincaid. Middle linebacker might not have been the person that many people wanted, but it was an issue. And the Bills think that they have a guy that they can at least mold into a middle linebacker in the future in Dorian Williams. And the last one I'll talk about is Justin Shorter. The Bills have been lacking, I guess, height and size in their receiving core for a little while now. And Justin Shorter brings something to the table that the Bills really haven't had. So it'll be interesting to see how they're able to develop him, mold him. I'm not expecting big things right away, but he is an intriguing prospect given some time and patience from the Bills organization.
You know, when it comes to this draft, I think what people need to remember is the Bills roster, and it's been like this for a couple of years, it's hard to crack. The top 53, there's very little wiggle room in terms of guys being able to make this roster. So when it comes time to actually draft, you're trying to fill in very minimal holes. It's not like most teams where there's glaring needs every single time. Obviously, you had the middle linebacker position, but the big issue with that was there was two real clear-cut guys that the Bills probably were going to go after, Jack Campbell and Drew Sanders. Jack Campbell went higher than anybody anticipated, and they passed on Drew Sanders for going towards Osiris Torrence, who people thought would be in the first round. I think Brandon's, asset management was what we've seen so far. He made a move to go up and get a guy that he felt potentially could have been taken before him. And when it came to getting other assets later on, he did some maneuvering and got some picks for next year. I think it's tough. I think this mindset that every draft is going to be perfect. Yes, Brandon Beane has had his blemishes, but guess what? When you land a quarterback, you're allowed to have those blemishes. You're allowed to take stabs on players that probably other teams wouldn't, because they know they've got a quarterback that can mask a lot of the issues. I mean, i.e. Tom Brady. The Patriots roster for how many years was pretty putrid, but Brady made them look really good because, well, he's Tom Brady. I think they did some nice things. I think Osiris Torrence in the second was a great pick. Obviously, he's a different stylistic offensive guard than what we have, i.e. David Edwards and Connor McGovern and Ryan Bates. Those guys are guys that can actually pull and, pin and pull and block on the outside. Torrence is a little bit bigger, a little bit more stout. But I think for what they want to do, I think potentially this team wants to get tougher to play against. I think that was the big issue with this team going into, this coming season out of the last season was I think they just got out physicaled, right? I think when it came to the trenches, they felt they weren't good enough. That's why you're seeing a lot of the moves they're making are predicated on maybe getting a little bit tougher in the aspects of the game that they weren't that good at. So when it came down to it, I think they did some nice stuff. Getting Dalton Kincaid when they did, I think the one conversation is, oh, well, no one knows much about Dalton Kincaid. Well, no one thought he'd be there. No one thought he'd be at 25 for the Bills to be able to take a stab at. So he's a luxury that we're able to have, and he's an offensive weapon. I don't care what the title is. At the end of the day, as long as he's scoring touchdowns and getting into the stat sheet somehow, that's fine by me. You can call him whatever you want. I think they did great.
Yeah, as long as Dalton Kincaid plays more than 80% of the snaps this year, which would be more than Travis Kelce played for the Chiefs last year, it's an adjunct failure for the Buffalo Bills. I kid about that take there. Obviously, I think some expectations need to be tempered a little bit for Dalton Kincaid, but me and Brandon Beane, we don't look at the draft the same way. I think anyone who watches the Air Raid Hour knows that, like Dave and myself, we love to invest ourselves into day 3 of the draft and finding those hidden gems and all those different things. And we see value where it seems like maybe Brandon Beane doesn't see value. So looking at the draft through Brandon Beane's lens, really, it's about looking at the first 3 rounds and then sort of just shrugging and going, whatever happens with the later half of the draft happens with the later half of the draft. And if you look at the first 3 rounds of the draft, the protect Josh Allen crowd really doesn't have a leg to stand on right now in terms of being upset, because the Buffalo Bills, sort of as Thomas mentioned, in the trenches, not just in the trenches, but like third downs, third and shorts, we now give ourselves the ability to run 12 personnel. We give Josh Allen this big, tall target over the middle of the field that maybe he's been lacking since Cole Beasley's game started to deteriorate about a season and a half ago. You add Osiris Torrence, who's just got this really powerful anchor. And even though he's a little bit different than Aaron Cromer's archetype, he's the kind of guy who can get things going in the run game. And as much as we want to knock Spencer Brown for his pass blocking ability, Osiris Torrence and Spencer Brown next to each other in the run game is a scary thought. And the Buffalo Bills should be able to get things going for James Cook, Damian Harris, Naimi Hines. Behind those two on the right-hand side, and I had a lot of issues with the Dorian Williams pick, mostly because I felt like there was just a run on weak side linebackers before the Buffalo Bills were up. You saw Deion Henley go. You saw Trenton Simpson go. You saw DeMarvion Overshone go. I sort of felt like the Buffalo Bills were like, oh no, Dorian Williams is the last one left, and panicked. I would have preferred a defensive tackle in that spot. Obviously, we have Poona Ford now, so that alleviates a lot of that sort of stress that I was feeling over that pick. And then Brandon Beane made those comments on Chris Long's podcast about how, hey, we're trying to get a little bit more interchangeable between our weak side linebacker and our middle linebacker. We're trying to get a little bit quicker, guys who can cover tight ends, guys who can cover running backs out of the backfield. I don't think Dorian Williams is that answer in 2023, because I think coming out of Tulane and having some of those processing issues that Brandon Beane was talking about, I think he's more of a 2024 guy, or maybe like Matt Milano, the second half of his rookie year can make an appearance. But it appears the Buffalo Bills are making a strategic change to the way they approach the linebacker position. So I think Dorian Williams is a good pick, because even if it's not this year, I think he'll make a difference next year. And then on top of that, I mean, you look at the guys the Buffalo Bills got on day 2. Again, Brandon Beane stressed, I think he can get a jersey. Brandon Beane's sick of his dudes getting poached on day 2 of the draft. Like, he's sick of watching these guys that they draft and they fall in love with, and they learn the playbook through training camp, walk away and go contribute on other football teams because there's not a spot for them here. Justin Shorter's got special teams ability. He's also got some upside as a boundary wide receiver. Nick Broker, I think, could be sort of a Ryan Batesy type. I don't think his ceiling's as high as Ryan Bates, but I think he's a guy who could be a spot starter in this league and a first offensive lineman off the bench in this league. And then you have Alex Austin, who's sort of that Dane Jackson, Levi Wallace, back into the draft type of cornerback that the Buffalo Bills seem to be able to squeeze the most out of. A lot of people thought Alex Austin would be a 3rd, 4th round pick. This DB class was loaded, and he wasn't. So it appears the Buffalo Bills got another really good DB late in the draft. And on top of all of that, Mr. Brandon Beane, who likes to wheel and deal on draft day, now has 10 picks to work with next year. As Josh Allen continues to get into this contract, as other contracts start to come on the books, and the Buffalo Bills need to fill some of these depth roles, guys like AJ Klein are aging out. You can't count on them forever. You know, you've seen guys like Dean Marlowe aging out. Like all these, some of these guys that the Bills have counted on for depth, they're aging out. You've got to be able to fill them with draft picks. We got 10 to play with next year. So to me, it was a solid draft. It's not what I would have done personally, but when I sit back, I look back on it, I reflect on it, there's really not too much I could be upset with.
Excellent points, fellas. And yeah, Judge, I agree with that completely. Again, when you're talking about Josh Allen and the cap hit that he's going to have next year as opposed to this year, as well as a team that's trying to maintain the window that they have right now. And again, with Josh Allen, you're always going to have a Super Bowl window, right? He's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He gives you a chance to win every single game, but adding insane amounts of draft capital every year and bringing in 10 picks, if you kept it that way, if you didn't decide to make a move, is so beneficial to your roster. You're probably going to pull a couple of starters out of it. You have them under team control for a few years. It's an incredibly smart move by Beane, in my opinion, because I think it was really telling in the later rounds of this draft too, because you kept seeing him trade back. You kept seeing, talent on the board, people that, on Twitter or us in our group chat were clamoring for them to take, and he decides to trade back. But in return, he's getting these late round picks. Now, all of a sudden, you're looking at 10 next year. It's nice to have that kind of security blanket of, well, we still got our value this year, because I see this draft as an incredibly high upside value draft where it seems like every person they take, you can make the argument that where they got them isn't indicative of where people thought they were projected to go. I mean, I saw Osiris Torrence first round projections, Dalton Kincaid even top 15 projections. I saw Dorian Williams, maybe some people mocked him in the second, some early third. Shorter, was a mixed bag. I think that was pretty fair to say. But again, there's plenty of upside with him, with Broker and Austin. So the fact that you can take some of these higher upside players and still accrue capital next year is what makes me really confident that this was a solid draft from Beane. And it makes me very excited for week one to see where they go, because it feels like the whole narrative of this offseason in general was that this team raised their floor from last year. And we were excited and thought this team was Super Bowl level last year. And to me, I still stand by that. They had a rough divisional game, but they got there, a good game, and it goes the other way. This team, this upcoming season, in my eyes, is on that level, but with better depth than what we worked with last year. You can make the argument that the linebacker position's a question mark. I would agree with you, but I'm also looking at every other position group and saying, wow, with the limited cap we had, with the limited draft picks we had, Bean really nailed this in my eyes. And we'll see how it plays out. But I'm sorry, go on.
I just wonder if I could interject real quick too, because if you look at the 3 picks, I think the biggest knock on the first 3 picks that you can make is that they're non-premium positions, right? Tight end is a non-premium position. Interior offensive line is a non-premium position. Weak side linebacker is a non-premium position. So that's like the biggest, I think, knock that most people have on this draft is we didn't walk away with like a high caliber premium position player. But Brandon Beane has sort of made the statement, like, we don't want to end up like the LA Rams. We don't want to have to tear this thing down. If you look at every single thing the Buffalo Bills have done this offseason, they've gotten better without sort of selling out or like selling the house or going all in. That's sort of the moves the Buffalo Bills have made this offseason. They've sort of settled their roster so it can be competitive, give them a shot in 2023. And then with those 10 premium picks, with the salary cap going up significantly because of gambling money, I think next year you're going to see more shots at premium position players.
And
I agree with that.
kind of on what you were saying, the top 9 guys on this roster, anybody who's watching, you guys need to know this. The top 9 guys on this roster account for $178.8 million. So Brandon Beane has to make a lot of things because the cap's going up to 256. That means you have from 178 to 256 to fit 43 dudes in. That's not a lot of wiggle room to make a lot of very, very important and impactful decisions for your roster. So like Judge was saying, I think these decisions they're not the here and now. And Brandon even said there's sometimes decisions that he has to make that are for the future of this roster because he doesn't want to be good just now. He wants to be good for the next 10 years, and he needs to keep building that out by doing these decisions.
And I think that sometimes fans don't see it that way because Buffalo has never won a Super Bowl. So there's always this sense of urgency from our fan base. Well, I don't care about 5 years from now. I want to win a Super Bowl right now. And they see the Rams a couple years ago go all out and win one. And a lot of fans want the Bills to do that same thing. But that's the worst thing you can do as a GM is to sacrifice everything for a year or two. And I'm happy Beane is building the team the way he is. And I think they will consistently be great as long as they have Josh Allen at quarterback. It just sometimes I can understand some of the fan base being a little annoyed when you're looking at middle linebacker the whole time entering the draft saying, this is our weakness. And then feeling like it's still a weakness after the draft, looking at right tackle going into the draft saying this is a weakness and then still leaving the draft unanswered. So I do get sometimes why fans could get upset with it, but that's just some of what comes along with the way Beane thinks as a GM.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you're a franchise that you root for, and we could talk about any sport. It doesn't matter if that team has won a championship before or not. It matters the distance between, right? So like me, and I went on this rant yesterday. I'm a Yankee fan. Yankees have gone, it's been 14 years without a championship. And they are stir crazy, those fans, because they want to see success. So I understand when Bills fans we've never won a Super Bowl want that success and have that urgency and want to see this team succeed. I do too. And I can understand that this team seems to be at some sort of sticking point where they can't get over that hump. But what I look at is how is my organization, how is the team I root for responding to this? Are they sitting down, doubling down on the decisions they've made, saying that they're, comfortable with what they have, making no improvements because they think they can get there? Or are they looking at the roster, assessing it, making changes, and bringing people in that they feel can elevate the level of play? You got to remember too, they can only do so much. The players got to execute. The coaching has to coach. It has to work. And these teams have to be successful. And luck has to go their way too. Got to remember there's partial luck when it goes for a Super Bowl run. So if I'm seeing that my organization that I root for is doing whatever they can to try and build this roster up, which I have seen Beane do this offseason, especially given the limited, again, resources that he had in the cap in the draft, I'm going to say I'm happy with the way he's building it. Now, yes, you can mortgage your future and be like a Rams and give it all up and get that one ring. But again, the Rams were a couple plays away from also blowing that. And then we would have called it a dismal failure. They got lucky. Again, there was talent on that roster. I'm not trying to invalidate it, but more to say that it's a fine line between success and failure when you're talking about a championship in a league as variable as the NFL. So the way Beane is approaching it, in my eyes, I think is a sustainable, healthy way to build a roster. And I'm glad that when we go into next season, even though there are a couple of big contracts dished out, I'll still be encouraged because he'll have the resources, at least a bit more, to try and build the roster up. So now let's take a look at our draft picks this year. Now, I know that we've on every show this week, people have assessed them. I want to kind of pose some questions to you guys about these picks, kind of a general summary of how we feel they're going to be used and your thoughts on it as a whole. So obviously, we'll start with Dalton Kincaid. Dalton Kincaid, Utah tight end. Again, one of the most sure-handed talents in this draft, only dropped 2 passes on 93 targets, which is insane, and racked up 70 receptions, 893 yards, 8 touchdowns. Now, again, the breakdowns of Dalton Kincaid are that he's going to be seen as kind of versatile tight end wide receiver. And again, his position listing is tight end. We know this. However, I do not see it as that he is only going to be used like a traditional tight end, because tight end, like many positions in football, is an incredibly nuanced gray area position, and not all of them are built the same. What I think Kincaid brings to the table is the ability to have a slot target that is a mismatch, as well as someone that can help you run 12 personnel, something that this offense didn't run often, but because they did not really have the second tight end to do it. So, Judge, I'm going to start with you. We'll go in reverse order here. Your thoughts on Dalton Kincaid, the pick, and how you view his usage, really a realistic outcome of what you see from him this year.
Yeah, I sort of echoed, and I was echoing this on our show, the Air Raid Hour, for 2 years. Ever since Tom Brady went to Tampa Bay, I was sort of in awe of that offense that they ran in their Super Bowl year, and the fact that they could literally on one play roll out OJ Howard, Cameron Brate, Rob Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette, and they could, power run on you. They could play action on you. And then literally with the snap of a finger, they could be in a spread offense with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Scotty Miller. And they could do things. Antonio Brown was there. They could do things to you out of the spread, and they could run out of the spread. I was in awe of like the versatility and the chess pieces they had on this offense. You see a lot of teams like the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith, who, even though Arthur Smith is like a douchebag, he is a very creative offensive mind who's moving towards positionless football on offense. The Buffalo Bills are starting to get there a little bit, and they're adding some chess pieces. The number one goal this offseason had to be freeing up Stephon Diggs, and this gives you the ability to do that. Dalton Kincaid, you can run that 11.5 personnel, where if they decide to come out in nickel, you can maybe run the ball. If they decide to come out in base, you can throw the ball, so it makes the defense have to think a little bit. You add Deontay Hardy, who's a quick separator. Gabriel Davis is now healthy. Josh Allen and James Cook are hopefully going to be creating more chemistry out of the backfield, so that you can get the passing game to the running back clicking a little bit. All of these things, when you piece them together, all take and alleviate pressure off of Stephon Diggs. All these off-speed pitches, Kincaid, Davis, Hardy, Shakir, Cook, they allow you to more easily go to and have a more effective fastball in Stephon Diggs. So the pick took me by surprise, 100%. Like, we hardly ever, I loved Dalton Kincaid. I'm a Pac-12 guy. I'm a West Coast guy. I loved watching him play football. Like, he's a legitimate threat. I never really thought of it as a possibility to the Buffalo Bills until he was picked. But when I did, I was super excited with all of these thoughts going through my head of just this offense being able to be more versatile.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at the Bills offense, when Josh Allen has been at his best, it was when Cole Beasley was in the mix, right? When Cole Beasley was taking, and he was that pressure release valve over the middle, finding the soft spot in the zones, just knowing where to sit down. It made Josh's job easier, because he knew at the very minimum, if all hell was going, loose, he could turn and look to Beasley, and Beasley would always be there. And that's something I think that Josh tried to get back to last season when they brought those familiar faces back for him. Was there was a very minimal trust level amongst the weapons he had. And so he said, get me somebody that I can rely on, that I know that I can trust, that I know that I can turn to, and they'll be there. So I think having a Dalton Kincaid, a guy that is sure-handed over the middle, because that's the other part. People were dropping passes left and right on Josh, and like that alone mentally causes so much anguish to a quarterback, because he doesn't know if he can throw to you and you're going to actually catch the ball. But if he has a guy that is sure-handed, a guy that he can turn to in a moment's notice over the middle, that will literally get him yards after the catch, because that's the other thing is people forget. Cole Beasley at the beginning was great. Cole Beasley at the end was literally catch, fall down. That is not going to be what Dalton Kincaid is. You're going to be able to throw Dalton Kincaid open, and he's going to be able to continue getting you yards. The other thing about Dalton Kincaid, which makes this really interesting, is when you have Dalton Kincaid, and I just had spam thing to show up on my screen. When Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox are both on the field together, defenses are going to have to decide, do we want another linebacker on the field? Do we want another corner? Do we have another safety? Because you have two guys that are athletically gifted that now they have to decide, how do they match up with you? Because prototypically in 12 personnel, you'd bring in another linebacker because generally speaking, sometimes it would lean itself towards a run. That's not always the case now when you have two athletically gifted, both inline and a Y type of tight end that can actually stretch your field. So I think it's going to be interesting as to what Dalton Kincaid can actually provide. But the other side about it is he's just going to be a little bit more peace of mind for Josh that they haven't had in a long time.
Yeah, I'm going to second a lot of what all three of you guys have just said about Dalton Kincaid. I think what this does is it also isolates the variable in the Bills' offense of why weren't they using the middle of the field last year? If they can't use it this year with a weapon like Dalton Kincaid, I think it's safe to know that Ken Dorsey is probably the issue with the offense in that scheme. But what I do find it an interesting match because Eric has shared a lot of stuff about when Ken Dorsey and Shula were together in Carolina. They used a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight end formations at that point in time. So there's been a lot of talk out of Buffalo about, well, why did you take Kincaid? Because Ken Dorsey doesn't know how to use Dawson Knox. So why are you drafting another tight end when you don't even know how to use your athletic, versatile tight end that you already have? And I always thought that was the dumbest thing possible because the way Kincaid is going to play is going to differ a ton from the way that Knox is used on the field. So I do think that Kincaid is going to come in right away and have an impact. I want to temper expectations a little bit. Some people are going to have thoughts of, well, he has to have 70-plus catches. He needs to have 800 yards, stuff like that. I think a reasonable expectation going into year one would be 45 to 55 catches, 500 to 600 yards, and maybe 6-7 touchdowns. Those are my just throw them out there expectations. I think right off the bat, Kincaid is going to make life a nightmare for opposing defenses when the Bills are in the red zone. When you can put Dawson Knox out there with Kincaid, and then you can also put a receiver like Gabe Davis, and now you have a running back room that has a bunch of different things that they can bring to the table. I think the Bills are going to be very dangerous inside the 20 and very tough for opposing defenses to match up with because you still have the red zone threat of Dawson Knox, but now you add another guy into that the offense that can also bring down a bunch of different catches and variety of different situations. So I think Dalton Kincaid is going to be a very good weapon for the Bills moving forward.
So, Mike, I'm really glad you brought up usage expectations, all of you. Thank you for that. That was great points. Also, there's some sort of broccoli conversation going on in the chat right now. I had to put it on the board because I don't know how it went into that, but I hope whoever's eating, I think I saw someone saying they're not feeling good, so feel better. Okay. Anyways, yeah, I'm really glad you brought up usage because this was something that I thought of this morning when I was looking and rereading some of the threads on Twitter. So we're talking about expectations for Dalton Kincaid, and naturally they're going to be high. He's a first-round pick. He's a tight end, and they traded a first and a fourth to get him. So I do understand fans having this level of, well, why did we take a first-round pick on a tight end if he's not going to produce in his first season and we don't have indications of his usage? And, we could have taken defense if we needed it more. And I get that. And if Dalton Kincaid isn't getting used in a way that we see as, viable where, missing potential, or maybe his development is slow, or maybe, it's not as great numbers as you'd like to see from a first round pick, I will be the first person to tell you, I'm skeptical of year 2. I didn't think it was the best first year. He needs to improve because we can be critical. We're allowed to do that. But what I want people to understand too is think about some of the discourse going into the draft and how we talked about potentially getting a receiver at 27. Maybe we don't trade up. Maybe we do. Maybe we trade up to go get a JSN. Maybe we get Zay Addison. Now, when we were talking about taking a receiver, one of the things I always made the point of, apart from wanting hybrid slot, whatever, was that I'm not expecting this receiver to come in and take all the targets, to take all of the receptions away from Diggs and Davis, to be our yard bell cow, to be the most touchdowns on the team. What I was expecting was to take a high upside guy who could come in here, find a role, and develop because he does not need to be the one right away. The one is already on this offense. Now, bringing in Kincaid to me doesn't change that narrative for me. I'm not expecting Dalton Kincaid to take everything away from Stephon Diggs-Davis to be this 1,000-yard guy. If he is, I will be ecstatic. And I want to stress, I am not betting against his success in the NFL. I am not saying he couldn't do this. But what I am saying is my expectations had always been for this guy to come in and just have an established role, to be a mismatch for defenses, to build a rapport with Josh, to come up clutch in those situations where you need someone on third down and you need that extra weapon. And whether that's him just getting 530 yards and 5 touchdowns, but ultimately it makes the offense better as a whole, that's successful to me. And I feel like that was the mantra the Bills went for this year. It wasn't the fact that this guy shouldn't say that. It is absolutely the fact that this guy could be a Kelsey type that could get 1,000 yards plus, but it's also the fact that his threat alone on the field could make things easier for the rest of your offense, and that's worth its weight in gold. So I just want to ask everyone who has seen the pick of tight end and is skeptical to just think of the upside of just having a tight end who could actually be your slot. Even if he is not putting up 1,000 yards, it could still be worth its weight in gold as a first pick. So that's really my take on that. I want to move on now because there's only so much time to O'Cyrus Torrence. And before we do, everyone in the chat, everyone who's watching this video, whether you are live or after the fact, please throw this video a like. We really appreciate your support, appreciate you watching. It helps not only myself, but everyone here on the network who does so much great work for you and puts out amazing content, everyone on the show, everyone in our chat. Please give this video a like, subscribe to Cover One, subscribe to the Premium Pass. We appreciate your time. Let us move on now. O'Cyrus Torrence. Now, this was a pick I first off didn't see them doing because I was one of those people, and a lot of people did this, bought into the Cromer type. He's not a Cromer type. Cromer's not going to go for this guy. He's different. It's not the projection. I also did not think this man was going to fall to 59. Lo and behold, he's still on the board. There he is. So, Mike, I'm going to start with you. Give me your thoughts on O'Cyrus Torrence, the pick, and how you think he'll be used in this offense to start.
So I think he will be the starting right guard to start the year over Ryan Bates. Which is quite a statement about his ability to just win over the position, which I think he will. To me, it was a value pick. You didn't expect this guy to fall to 59. And at that point, he's too good of a player to let him fall any further and to let him go. I know Drew Sanders, Trenton Simpson were both on the board still at that point. A lot of fans were hoping that the Bills would snag one of them to address their linebacker position. That to me, that what that answered was basically they saw the upside of someone that could be a solid right guard for many years to come over a linebacker that may or may not work out in their defense. So I don't have a ton to say about the pick. Obviously, we all have talked about him not really being the prototypical Cromer type, but this guy is just massive and he takes care of business, pardon me, guys, and never allowed a sack in college, dominated at Louisiana before transferring to Florida. I would have been happy if this was a first-round pick early in the draft process. I'm ecstatic that it's a second-round pick after last week.
You know, I think when it comes to O'Cyrus Torrence, I think the interesting thing that we have to look at is when it came down to it, the line was just not good enough last year. And I think they felt the more stabs they take at something, better off they're going to be. And I think with Roger Saffold obviously being gone, you have Connor McGovern, who plays typically at left guard. That right guard spot is open. And when they were at their best, it was when Ryan Bates was off the bench as that sixth lineman. And a guy that's a five position offensive lineman is a luxury most teams don't even have, especially one that's as good as Bates. So to have a guy like O'Cyrus Torrence in there to be able to step in probably fairly early, I don't know if he'll get it right out of the gate, but I think he definitely will have a shot at it. Outside of that, all you've got is Ike Bucker, who I think is still probably coming back from that Achilles injury because it's one of the hardest ones to come back from. And then you got David Edwards, right? I think what they're looking at is this year, they saw what kind of issues they ran into with Josh last year. They don't want to have another UCL injury happen to him. They don't want to have an issue where the Miami game where the line was just collapsing on him. They need to give him every opportunity to succeed. And guess what? Just like any other thing, when you get more draft picks, you get more opportunities. The more stabs you take at getting the right 5 guys up in front of him, they're going to do. And I think what they saw it was a position of value for them, a guy that was probably not supposed to be there because maybe for other teams he didn't fit their need or their specific scheme. And they felt that Aaron Kromer, the whisperer of offensive linemen, could potentially get him to where he needs to be. And there is some talk. I know people say he can't pull. I've heard that he can pull outside. I think he's going to be a valuable asset to this team. The more physically you can get. I mean, when Richie Incognito was here, this line was at its best. And I think just that bit of nasty is going to be something that is desired, especially for a team that I think is going to be utilizing the run more than we have in the past. So I think it was a good pick. It was a guy that they can use in multiple different ways. And when it comes down to the goal line, they can bring in a sixth offensive lineman and get real physical on the edge where they were doing it before. And they were bringing like a Tommy Doyle, a guy that is fine. He's okay, but he's not a world beater. I think, Cyrus Torrence is going to be a guy that commands respect and a guy that you have to look at and say, we can't just, bull rush over the top of him because he is a physical guy that can set his feet and can really bear down and not allow any inside pressure.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts here, so I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible. But as you guys have all sort of mentioned, there were questions about sort of his fit. Is he the Kromer type? He's somebody who maybe has some questionable lateral agility. He's somebody who might have some limited range as a pass blocker. But as Thomas pointed out, a guy like Richie Incognito probably had the same questions, and he played under Aaron Kromer when he was here in Buffalo and had some success. And at the end of the day, I think the most important part of O'Cyrus Torrance's game is his ability to anchor in pass protection. He is a big, thick dude, which is not something you have typically seen from Buffalo Bills offensive linemen in the past. Who do we have to go up against every year in the AFC East? Quinnen Williams, Christian Barmore, Christian Wilkins. Who do we have to face every year in the playoffs? DJ Reader, who has probably kept us from getting to our ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl? Chris Jones. So there are all of these bigger, bulkier interior defensive linemen with pass rush ability, both in the AFC East and the AFC in general. And they have stood in the Buffalo Bills' way for years. And now you have a guy in O'Cyrus Torrence who I think has the strength and has the ability to anchor against these guys and sort of stymie them to a degree. On top of all of that, I think he also, as these guys have mentioned, jumpstart your running game. He in himself is a dominant enough of a run blocker to help get your run game going. You can't say that about left guard Connor McGovern. Connor McGovern's going to need help, right? It's going to be a team effort. And Connor McGovern's going to be like a cog in the machine to try to get the run game going on the left-hand side. That's not the case with O'Cyrus Torrence. He's the kind of guy who can maul you and create lanes all in his own over there on the right-hand side, especially with another guy who's pretty darn good at run blocking in Spencer Brown. So that'll jumpstart your run game. And then on top of all of that, you now make Ryan Bates probably the best backup offensive lineman in football. He could play left guard. He could play center. He could play right guard. He can get you out of a game, as Brandon Beane said, at right tackle. Who knows? Maybe he can get you out of a game at left tackle. The Buffalo Bills, who suffered many injuries along the offensive line over the last couple of years, now have one of the most versatile backup offensive linemen in football. So depth is key if you want to be a championship caliber football team, especially on the offensive line. So a lot of positives from this pick.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Judge, because Ryan Bates being kind of now essentially the utility offensive lineman, it's a luxury that not a lot of teams get to have, or not a lot of teams get one that we can be confident when he comes into position. This is a point I made a million times. Anyone who's watched the show has heard me say this before. I know I've said it in the chat, but again, I'm one of those people who will always say we should start looking at life after Mitch Morse, not because of talent, not because of a disdain for him, because I'm worried about one concussion ending his career. What I think when I said going into this draft was I would like to see them maybe take center, I was actually fairly confident they would take center or some form of interior O-line, because I felt like they were going to try and find that long-term solution to Mitch Morse. But I just thought that was going to be like a Whippler or a JMS or a Tittman. Turns out that when you take O'Cyrus Torrence and later on Nick Broker, what you're kind of allowing yourself to do is Ryan Bates could actually inherit the center role if Morse goes down, and maybe even take it long-term if Morse retires from an injury. Because Bates isn't I don't think as good of a center, but I think it at least gives you the chance to have a new center, fill in someone who can at least keep a sustainable level of play. And if Torrence develops into a proper guard and does well in the NFL, now the level of play on your right side doesn't drop off. And I think that's important too, is you want to still have that cohesive feeling on your offensive line where no matter what happens or if you have to move things around, the play can still be sustainable, can still be good. So that's something I really love about the Torrence pick, just beyond his ability as a run blocker, beyond the potential as a pass blocker. Again, you said it, in a conference that is loaded with difficult interior defensive line depth. So O'Cyrus Torrence excites me. I'm looking forward to see how they use him. The one thing I'll say is I hope they don't make him trim down. I think keep him at his size. I like how big he is. I think that's his bread and butter, is just the fact that he's a big boy, that he can move people, that he's physical, that he's aggressive and uses his size and acts like he's his size. Like, I don't want to take that component away from him. If they do that, I just hope it doesn't regress his play at all. So, gentlemen, any more thoughts on Torrence before we move on to everyone's favorite draft pick this year?
I just never even thought the Bills would ask him to lose weight until you mentioned it. So now I'm worried. So thanks for that. I appreciate that.
Anything to give you nightmares. That's what I'm here for. All right, let's move on to Mr. Dorian Williams, the picture of Dorian Williams, a.k.a. the single draft pick that I think has the fans the most divided. Now, we could talk all day about the loss of Tremaine and whether this guy is the right size to be a middle linebacker in the NFL, or we could talk about how McDermott's once upon a time manned a defense that had a couple of undersized quote-unquote linebackers. I'm going to look at the upside with this guy. I'm going to be an optimist here. I think this guy's got a high motor. I think he chases people down. I think he has the athleticism to play NFL-level pass coverage against slot wide receivers and tight ends. And I think he's a high motor guy that can go across the field. So for me, I think they view Dorian Williams, and I think it was you, Judge, who mentioned this earlier. One of you mentioned this, that Bean's comments on Long's podcast mentioned something about maybe a transition into how they use linebackers in this defense. And whether that is because they lost Edmonds and had to cope and adjust from it, whether that is a mantra they had since the playoffs ended last season. The one thing that I am fairly confident in is taking Williams, and also some of your signings, such as Poona Ford, such as Taylor Rapp, indicate to me a defensive shift of some sort, where you're going to see some changes in how the scheme runs, not an overhaul to the scheme itself, but new wrinkles that teams might not be ready for, that might not have seen from us. And also, I think that's an opportunity, a good change, for the fact that you're about to embark on what is probably going to be the most difficult AFC East that I think any of us have seen in years, maybe in our lifetime. Rodgers to the Jets, Bill O'Brien back to the Patriots that have loaded up with talent. The Dolphins still being the Dolphins, as long as Tua stays healthy, they're going to be a formidable offense with a great coordinator running that team. So, Mike, I'll start with you. We'll go in the other order. But talk to me about your thoughts on Dorian Williams, your thoughts on his usage. Did I start with Mike last time, or did I start with Judge last time, actually? You guys remember?
Let's just roll with it. No worries either way.
All right. Yeah. I was trying to keep it in order. I apologize. But, yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm not going to pretend that when Dorian Williams was picked by the Bills that I was so happy and pumped about the pick. But I did think the reaction to the pick was a little bit of overkill. And I think Bean made it a little bit worse with his initial comments about him starting out at outside linebacker and primarily being a special teams player, especially a year after the Bills used another third-round pick on Terrell Bernard. So literally you have flames already starting because all the fans wanted a middle linebacker in this draft, and then you didn't take the one they wanted, and then you say he's going to be an outside linebacker. So I do think it was a little bit bad of a start from an outside perspective, but then when you start looking into it more, realizing that the Bills want more interchangeability with their linebackers, that they might be looking for some changes to how they run their defense, it makes sense from a developmental aspect. I think Bean's comments on Friday after selecting Dorian Williams were to temper expectations, so fans wouldn't think this guy is going to come in right away and fix your middle linebacker problem. Overall, Dorian Williams' body is fine for being a middle linebacker in the league. I think the bigger questions are his processing at this time. Can he come in and be able to process at a level that warrants starting? Probably not. I'm with Judge in what he said earlier. The earliest he probably gets a shot at starting on this defense would be the second half of this season. It's more likely it might be next year. But that doesn't mean he won't be a solid contributor going forward. What I really think this shows is that the Bills are changing things up. A pick like this, you add Taylor Rapp, like you mentioned, Joe. This defense is going to look different than what we have seen the past couple years overall, and that's probably a good thing, because at times against the better offenses in the league, the Kansas Cities, the Cincinnatis, this defense has been exploited. So there obviously has to be some changes that are made overall, and we'll see what Dorian Williams how he ends up fitting in the years to come. But I don't really expect him to be an instant contributor on this team.
You know, the one thing that I keep going back to with Brandon Beane is these aren't always immediate impact moves, right? This is long-term planning. And the one thing I keep thinking about is Matt Milano has a out in 2 years on his contract. Not that I think that they'd go away from Matt Milano, but he is getting older. He's getting towards the tail end of his career, which is crazy to think because I feel like he just got here. And when you look at that, having a guy like Dorian Williams who could come in different packages to help, whether it's in blitz or just in coverage of, if you're going to go a nickel defense, you could have him come in there and play coverage without having to do a ton of processing, because you could potentially move Matt into that middle linebacker where he has to, read the A gap, the C gap, and just allow a guy like Dorian Williams to just run and shoot. I don't think that he's going to be coming in, obviously, and being an instant impact, and that's fine. Brandon Beane said himself in his pre-draft presser that guys after the first round, really second, third, and going forward, are guys that are probably going to have minimal to no impact in their first year on the team. And I think that's what's going to happen is you're going to have a guy that can kind of learn alongside. You can learn alongside of a guy like Matt Milano, and what better of a position for a guy like him to continue learning. The one thing I want to say, and Mike, you said this before, and I think it's been kind of spoken about. Tremaine Edmonds is not the rule. He is the exception to the rule. He is a 6'5" anomaly. Middle linebackers it just doesn't happen that he's that big, that fast, that agile. He was very much a one in a, I don't want to say one in gender. People use unicorn far too often nowadays as a token word. We were lucky to have a guy that could do the things he could do, but he also had his own issues, right? Using that as a metric, like using Josh Allen as a metric for quarterbacks, right, is going to get you in trouble. You can't look at Tremaine Edmonds and say, we need to find another guy like Tremaine, because you're just not going to. There have been a ton of successful linebackers, i.e. Nick Bolton in Kansas City. You could look at Zach Thomas, a guy who was only a hair above 6 foot, that have been incredibly successful in their careers in the NFL that were not big dudes. You don't have to be big to be successful. You just have to understand the game, process well, and be able to actually have certain motor skills, right, that make you a quality linebacker. I think what Dorian Williams does well will actually benefit him long-term in this game. And to be honest with you, he could be that intermediary in between thumper kind of tweener guy that we used to have as a, smaller linebacker, bigger safety. There's a lot of packages that they can do. And what you're going to see going forward, because this is not Leslie Frazier's defense. Back when Sean McDermott was the defensive coordinator in Carolina, he had smaller linebackers. He had Thomas Davis. He had Shaq Thompson, right? He had guys that weren't, big, but they were fleet of foot. You might see an ideology change that actually allows Dorian to be successful in Buffalo.
Thomas, you made a point. You said, Matt Milano's got an out in his contract 2 years from now, and the Bills are probably maybe unlikely to use that. But it definitely got me thinking about what happens if Matt Milano gets hurt this year. And a lot of fans are going to come at me with like a pitchfork for this comment, because I feel like we made this comment about Terrell Bernard last year, but linebacker is so important to this defense, and linebackers miss time year after year after year for the Buffalo Bills, whether it's Milano, whether it's Edmonds. Brandon Beane said on the Chris Long podcast, or it might have been in his post-game press conference, I apologize if I'm confusing where he said it, but he said Dorian Williams might have had a better chance to compete to be a starter had Matt Milano not existed, if he was competing for the weak side linebacker job. So if Terrell Bernard and Tyrell Dodson and AJ Klein and Baylon Spector, if they're all competing at middle linebacker, and they're all concentrating and focusing there. What happens if Matt Milano goes down for a game or two, which he's done almost every single year of his career? You sort of have Dorian Williams here, at least in 2023, as a special teams player, as a fail-safe option in case Matt Milano gets hurt. But if you look at his long-term future, like, why did the Buffalo Bills buy into Dorian Williams? Why did they draft him? He's clearly got that NFL size and frame, 6'1", 228 pounds. RJ Melville said he looks like he's got the body type that maybe over a year, because you might not look to him to be a starter until next season, you could maybe add 5-10 pounds to that frame without him losing that 4.49 speed, that athleticism. Why else did the Buffalo Bills go after him? He's clearly got college production, special teams ability. He's a great athlete. He's got those movement skills, sideline to sideline. My biggest issue with Dorian Williams, though, that I always come back to is almost every single scouting report, can he read and react? Can he process? Can he do that at an NFL level? And is that something that's coachable? Like, is that something, like, is our instincts something that's coachable? And I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see over the course of the next year, 2 years, whether instincts are in fact coachable. And it's something that Dorian Williams can work on. And just one last point here on Dorian Williams. Again, if the Buffalo Bills are shifting their philosophy, because Tremaine Edmunds was that exception, it's going to be really important over the next 2 years how we reconstruct the interior defensive line room. Poona Ford was great pickup. You have Daquan Jones, who's getting older. Hopefully Jordan Phillips can stay more healthy. Tim Settle maybe can move now to 3-tech, be more comfortable. But I think the Buffalo Bills need to rethink their interior defensive line, because I don't know if, despite the fact that when he's healthy, he's a good player, guys like Ed Oliver are sustainable in front of these middle linebackers. You may need to pivot more to the guys who are 315, 320 pounds.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think this season, I think Edmonds had his best year, right? In a contract year nonetheless. But I think a lot of that had to do with how well our defensive line was playing, how good, whatever. Especially the interior, when they were healthy. You saw it in the first couple of weeks, and you see just what a good defensive line can do for your linebacker room. When you build up your line and they're disruptive in both the pass and running game for an offense, and they can't figure them out and they can't stop them from getting pressure, it makes it a lot easier to clean up the mess on the back end for a linebacker. I think if you want to try and mitigate some of the issues with Williams' potential processing, should that not develop into a level you're comfortable with in the NFL? First off, I think McDermott's defense, if he's inheriting it, is going to be much more attack-minded. I do think that you obviously still have to have processing ability, but I think if you're blowing plays up with the line of scrimmage, or your defensive line is doing a good enough job of it, or you have some new blitzes, then maybe you can forgive it a little more, because his athleticism can get him to the spot he needs to be in. However, if you have these types of looks where you're going to have to rely on his processing, it's going to make it much easier to have good enough defensive line play, especially on the interior, to kind of make these plays slow down and make it easier on your linebacker room, especially if there's uncertainty about it. So I'm really glad you brought that up. I think there's potential for Williams. Again, I think it indicates some sort of shift. We'll see. I love the idea of having depth. I also love the idea of, if this depth works and you have this kind of committee of linebackers. I think last year when you saw Edmonds go down, and I think the Vikings game is the best example of this, you saw the drop-off in the ability of these linebackers to cover, the drop-off in passing defense, especially in the middle of the field. I think if these guys are capable of hanging with the middle of the field receivers or tight ends, you might not get that drop-off should one of these guys go down. Again, it's bright-eyed optimism for me, but I'm going to look for the good in it. If I have reason to see that it isn't working, I will obviously address that. So in the abundance of time, I'm going to lump these three together, because we have, three more picks to go. So I'll just ask the panel, of these three, who do you see the most upside for in year one, or maybe long term? And if you decide on a specific player, how do you think they'll be used? So Judge, we'll start with you. Of Justin Shorter, Nick Broker, and Alex Austin, give me your favorite of the three.
I will say it's just a tie, because I think all three guys are really the same in terms of upside. It all depends on who ends up getting the ability to be on the field on offense or defense, right? Because if the guys in front of Justin Shorter are good, he's never going to get to see the field on offense. If the guys in front of Nick Broker are good, he's never going to get to see the field on offense. If the guys on defense in front of Alex Austin are good, he's never going to get to see the field. So to me, whoever gets the opportunity to actually play offense or defense will be possibly the one who pops. But I think they all have a high upside. Like Justin Shorter and Nick Broker, they were both highly sought after high school recruits. So they sort of already had that sort of like prestige or persona going into college, and then maybe underachieved a little bit in college. But now Brandon Beane likes to bet on those traits. But I just want to speak on Justin Shorter a little bit, because a narrative that's been coming out over the past couple of weeks has been like, oh, maybe if Jamison Crowder didn't get hurt, the Bills season would have went a little bit different away, to have that option over the middle of the field, to have a better slot receiver. I think the one wide receiver injury that goes under the radar is Jake Kumaro. And the fact that Gabriel Davis was banged up all year. And you saw in the Tennessee game, we were able to sort of survive that because Jake Kumaro stepped up. But then Jake Kumaro, after the Miami game and some other games, he suffered injury after injury after injury. I think Justin Shorter is a comfortable wide receiver number 5 in the NFL. He can play 4 phases of special teams. He's a big body, a guy who can go up and get it. He can do a lot of the things that Gabriel Davis does. Gabriel Davis is important to our offense. He got hurt last year. He struggled last year. And really, with Kumaro out, there was nobody to sort of mimic what he did on the field, give him time to heal his body, get his body right. Justin Shorter, I'm not saying Justin Shorter is Gabriel Davis or could be Gabriel Davis. He was a later pick than Gabriel Davis for a reason. A lot of people think the Buffalo Bills reached to take him in the 5th round. He was maybe more of a 6th or 7th round guy. I think he can mimic what Gabriel Davis does on the field, and he can give you 4-phase special teams ability. So Justin Shorter, I think, will be the most impactful in 2023. I think that's why the Bills maybe finger quotes reached for him. And I think he's got a future on this football team for not just 1, but 2 contracts, because I think he can be that steady bottom of the roster player who contributes in a number of ways.
Tom, you're on mute.
I'm the worst. I'm sorry. I did this on my own show. I was going to go with Shorter, but Judge stole that. So I'll speak about Brocker. Brocker's another one of those, high character guys. And that's probably what got him on this team, aside from his actual ability. He was a Kent Hull All-American, a guy that, has this leadership quality beyond quality. He's been a captain for almost the entirety of his college career. And he's a guy that you can bounce inside and outside. His ability has been one of those guys that they can lean on heavily at Ole Miss. He's been super, super successful. I mean, in his own college career, he started I think it was 48 career contests for Ole Miss, which is unbelievable for a college offensive lineman. So he's one of those guys for the Bills, like Judge said earlier, that'll just be nice to have, because he's another piece to the puzzle, potentially long-term, but a guy that's a plug-and-play type of guy. For a Bills team that for most part was pretty healthy last year, saw what could happen when their season went sideways on them because of injury. I think that's something that Brandon Beane felt that he needed to show up certain things. Defensive line, offensive line, couple positions that he really felt were not successful. And a guy like Nick Brocker, who probably in a different draft could have been drafted in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, but because of the fact that this draft had a little bit more talent than usual, I think he actually boded well for the Bills, where they were able to get a guy like him later on who potentially could be an impact player. He's going to have some learning curve, right? But I think what the Bills feel is an advantage to them is they have a guy like Aaron Cromer who can work with these young guys that may need some tooling, may need a little bit work. Maybe their footwork isn't perfect or their hand placement isn't the greatest, but that's something that Aaron can work on. Because one of the tools that Aaron talks about is where that hand placement is. And that's what he feels makes those offensive linemen so successful. The other thing that I know for a fact that Aaron Cromer preaches is he wants these guys to be themselves. He wants them to rely on what they've done well for most of their career. And that's how he gets the best. Like, that's why Incognito was so well, because Aaron Cromer let Incognito be Incognito. And that's where that nasty came out. So I think a guy like Brocker is great for the Bills. He's going to provide a lot of depth for them. But the other part about it is, and I think this was mentioned, the Bills are in a tough position with that top 53 where they might have to take guys at the back end of the draft that might have been a UDFA because they know they probably aren't going to be able to draw them into Buffalo. So they have to go ahead and reach on a guy for that reason alone.
So I want to preface my opinion by saying I'm kind of more the way Brandon Beane is as a drafter than what Judge is. I value, and that's not a slight to Judge. I value the day one, the day two guys. I when it comes to day three guys, I more look at it as you're throwing darts. You hope that you hit, but you're really more so looking for, does this guy have an elite attribute, but maybe for whatever reason he didn't stand out to where he should have, or does he have an amazing trait or something? Maybe he's tall, maybe he's fast, something that just sticks out that you're willing to take a chance on. And the one thing that Brandon Beane has really done well with late round picks with the Bills has been going after DBs and going after wide receivers. You look at all the DB hits. You're talking about Dane, DeMar. It looks like Christian Benford's going to be a hit. Obviously, Levi Wallace was an undrafted free agent. At wide receiver, I'll count Gabe as a late round. I know he was a fourth, but even Hodgins, we're seeing that he was at least worthwhile playing at an NFL level. I think Khalil Shakir is going to be good. So I think just answering this question, it probably has to go between Shorter or Austin, because those are two positions that the Bills will like to put some development into. Not saying that Broker can't work out, but there's a lot of guys in front of him in the pecking order. So that would make it more of a long-term developmental pick, if anything. So I'll say for this question, I'll go Shorter, just because I see more of an avenue to him actually being able to earn playing time on this team. I don't think he's going to be a tremendous impact player this year, but you look at the height, the athleticism, and the vertical threat that he brings to the table. I think the Bills are working with something, and I think give it some time, he could potentially be a weapon for Josh Allen. Now, are we ever talking like 70, 80 catches? I'm not even in that ballpark, but I think he could be a guy that one day maybe he could give you 30 to 40 catches and maybe be a red zone threat with some with his height and a vertical threat as a good backup to Gabe. But Austin, we'll see. As Judge said earlier in the show, and same with you, Joe, this was a guy that Austin could have been a day two pick, third, fourth rounder, fell to the Bills in the 7th round. And now it's just time to see what happens. If there's an injury to Benford, if there's an injury to someone in front of him, does he earn an opportunity when given the chance?
One thought on Austin as well. Like, he was one of my favorite corner. I did not do a lot of corner research. He was one of the guys I did some research on because I've seen him play in the Pac-12. A lot of people are questioning like his man-to-man coverage ability, but I thought his man-to-man defense, at least from some of the scouting reports I read and from what I've seen, pretty solid. I don't know where like the knocks on his man-to-man defense comes from. So he's man versatile. He's zone versatile. He's got good size. He was a wide receiver in the past. He's returned kicks. He's returned punts. He's won like numerous community service awards. He's like started charitable organizations while at Oregon State. So he's just sort of that community guy as well. He got knocked for his 4.55 40 at the combine. That's what apparently knocked him down 4 rounds or 3 rounds, which I think is absolutely insane because this guy's got a sprinter background. So when he goes and he has to match a guy who's going vertical, he can go stride for stride with wide receivers, at least Pac-12 wide receivers that are trying to take you vertical. So I think Alex Austin could legitimately, if injuries happened, plug and play his rookie year. I think Alex Austin, especially in a Sean McDermott, no longer Leslie Frazier, but a Sean McDermott defense, I think Alex Austin, if needed, could play right away. And I was a huge fan of all 3 picks for various different reasons, for Shorter and for Broker, because I think they are long-term backups, very versatile type of guys. And Alex Austin, because I think he's got stopgap starter potential in the National Football League. Maybe at another team, he could be a starter in the National Football League. It's going to be difficult, but I legitimately think the Buffalo Bills need to find a way to roster all three of these guys. I don't know how they have to do it because they might have to keep 10 offensive linemen and 10 DBs to do it, but I legitimately think that all three of these guys need to be rostered. I will be very, very sad if we lose one of these three guys. And I think Brandon Beane drafted all three of these guys with the thought in mind that he would roster them, because you saw the way he was trying to get out, make moves to maybe decrease the number of picks and increase the number of picks next year.
Yeah, great points, guys. And I'd say of the three, I mean, I never bet against McDermott's ability to develop late round defensive backs. We've seen him do it numerous times. Dane Jackson, Levi Wallace, Christian Benford. Those are just three examples, and two are still on the roster now. I think Alex Austin, I don't know about a year one starter, but I think Dane being on the limited amount of time he has might walk, or they might move on from him, and they might want to take the cheaper option to fill that part of the cornerback room later next year. So I think Austin will have a place on this team. Shorter, again, I'm glad you guys brought up the Kumaro point, because we talked about how thin this team was at the boundary last year. And when Gabe went down, it was present. And when Kumaro went down, it was even more present. I mean, you can't just depend on the front side of Diggs and Davis to be healthy all year. You want them to be. You hope they are. But I think it's a tad bit unrealistic to not expect something to come up where one of these guys has to miss a game. I love the idea of Shorter being taken as your just potential boundary depth piece, that you are able to have a guy with a big body who's good at ball tracking, who can be there on the outside, who could be there in red zone packages because he's 6'4" and like 220 pounds. And if you wanted to run some sort of red zone formation where you had your two tight ends as well as like Shorter and Davis, like big bodies in the end zone, I think there's, apart from special teams, a path for Shorter to make it. And again, Broker, the same thing, for guard depth. I mean, you have to talk about Bakker coming off an Achilles injury. Like you said, Thomas, that is a very hard injury to come back from, especially when you are consistently planting your feet and need to be stable. There is no tell that Bakker is going to be not ready to play, but back into the form that he had when he got hurt. I think this is more of an insurance move. If Bakker isn't looking good in camp, now you have this high upside left guard who also has experience at left tackle that might be able to fill that role in the depth and, be on this team. So I think there's a path for all three. Now, before we wrap up, guys, I just want to ask you about the free agency signings that we had, and then we'll sign off for the week. But give me your opinions on both Murray and Poona Ford. Obviously, a lot of speculation for both in free agency. There's value for each one on this roster. Obviously, Poona Ford, I think, is going to have more impact than Murray will, but that's my opinion. Mike, I'll start with you. We'll go around the panel real quick. What do you guys think about these signings?
Yeah, love the Poona Ford addition. It feels like Greg Thompson has been pushing for that for like a month and a half, 2 months already. So he must know something. But yeah, that was a solid addition, a big improvement to the Bills' defensive line. Not a bad contract at all. And now you have the ability, when you take Daquan Jones out of the game, to have another guy, big man down low, that can take care of business. Latavius Murray, we'll see how that works out. I know, Judge, he was one of your guys that you were pushing for the Bills to sign. A lot of people seem to think that it's either him or Damian Harris. I think there's a scenario where you could have Cook, Harris, and Latavius Murray all on this roster. Murray's been a consistently solid player for the last 6-7 plus years and brings something different to the table. So it is interesting. I definitely think the Bills wanted to add some more versatility and have different dynamics in the running back room, something that they really didn't have dimension-wise when they had Singletary and Cook. So I like both signings, and we'll see if there's a spot for Murray on this roster come regular season.
I love me some Latavius Murray, little Central New York kid. Man, if you watch Latavius Murray, he's been as good from the day he stepped in the league till he is now. It doesn't look like the guy's missed a beat. He's got short yardage burst. He's a big dude. If you don't know, he's 6'3". He's a monster of a man. And quite frankly, he's good between the tackles. He's a guy that for this Bills team will be beneficial. And here's one reason why. Tywan Jones is not on this roster. Tywan Jones was a reason why every year there was one guy that didn't make the team because they rostered a running back who played as a special teams gunner. He's gone. They didn't resign him. That leaves a hole and an available spot that you could have a Latavius Murray and have 4 running backs. Because here's the other thing. I think Nyheim Hines, I don't think they look at him as a running back anymore, quite frankly. I think he's a pass catcher, and I think he is a specialty kick returner, punt returner. So really, you're talking it's James Cook, Damian Harris, and I think Latavius Murray. And like, I like Damian Harris. He's a thicker running back, but he's not what I think people think he's going to be in terms of that guy that's going to be that smash mouth back. That's what Latavius Murray, I think, was supposed to be. They've been looking for a number of years, a guy that they can bring in. And really, I think the big part about this, and if you listen to the Green Light, it's Chris Long's podcast, he talks emphatically about protecting Josh. He even talked about when Josh Allen came back, they let him play after that UCL injury. They literally told him, they said, listen, no unnecessary hits. And he took this one hit, he lowered his shoulder, and Brandon Beane called down to the trainers and said, listen, you need to tell him if he doesn't stop, I'm going to take him out of the game. Josh looked at him and smiled. So you know that Josh just doesn't care. Like, that's just Josh. He's a freak, right? So you need a guy that can usurp that and take that pressure off of Josh and take off those hits. That's Latavius Murray. I think he's going to have an impact role on this team. He's fantastic. I'm telling you, go watch some tape from last year. He had his best season last year. He had 760 something yards, 7 touchdowns, and he was only 0.2 yards per carry less than Devin Singletary. Still got a lot of juice left in the tank. And for the fact that he's been used sparingly, it's worked to his benefit. Poona Ford, dude, we've needed guys. I love Jordan Phillips. I think he's fantastic for this team, but the guy does dumb stuff. Both times he got injured is because he was diving, chasing after somebody, and it took an unnecessary hit or unnecessary injury. Man, I think getting another impact player on that defensive line, get nasty. And if you watch Poona Ford, he is big. He's got arms like Stretch Armstrong. Once he wraps you up, you're literally stuck. I think he's going to be another guy that's going to be so impactful on this defensive line. I think both of them are low key Brandon Beane, Magic Man signings, dude. He's been so good in this.
I got to interject real fast before you go, Judge.
Yeah.
Latavius Murray racked up, it was 745 yards, 6 touchdowns, 171 carries in 12 games. That's the best part of the whole thing.
Between two teams,
he was on pace to shatter that at 32 years old. That is insane to me. So I'm sorry.
He reminds me of like when like 38-year-old AP was going off for like the Washington Commanders. That's what it reminds me the most of. But Poona Ford, I'll start with Poona Ford. You know, you look at him like 310, 315 pounds. He struggled in Seattle last year because they were transitioning to that 34 defense, but he's exactly what the Buffalo Bills needed. Last year when DaQuan Jones went down or DaQuan Jones was inactive due to injury, you saw it had just as big of an effect as when we lost Von Miller. So now you have Poona Ford and you have DaQuan Jones. You sort of have the handcuffs at the one tech, and both of these guys have the ability to push up field and be pass rushers as well. And that allows guys like Ed Oliver, Jordan Phillips, and now hopefully Tim Settle to do their thing at the 3 tech position. It frees them up. The biggest thing that people want to talk about is how defensive tackles, there's no defensive tackles under contract next year. It's going to be one of the biggest makeovers the Buffalo Bills have to make in 2024. Poona Ford is 27 years old. DaQuan Jones also at the 1 tech, even though he's getting up there, that's a position where it ages gracefully, the 1 tech position. As long as you're big, as long as you're fat, as long as you're in good shape, like DaQuan Jones is, you can play that position successfully into your mid 30s, into your late 30s almost. I think if I'm projecting what the Buffalo Bills do into the future, I'm feeling very confident that if Poona Ford has a good season, he's only 27 years old. You can lock up DaQuan Jones next offseason, extend him for a couple of years. You can extend Poona Ford next offseason, and then you can hit the reset button at 3 tech. Ed Oliver, Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, they're all off the books. You can look to the draft. You can look to free agency. Hey, if Ed Oliver pops off, you can pay him. Who knows? But you can look. You have your 1 tech maybe settled if you can get both of these guys extended, and then you can reset your 3 tech. It takes some of the pressure off the Buffalo Bills because I think some of these guys could be a factor post 2023, even though their contracts are up. And then for Latavius Murray, I think the Buffalo Bills have some really good handcuffs, right? James Cook goes down, you have Nyheim Hines. Damian Harris goes down, you have Latavius Murray. There are good handcuffs there. On top of that, I think there are really 3 ways in which this Latavius Murray thing could play out. Number one, he could just straight up be this year's version of Duke Johnson, right? He's a veteran. No one really wanted him. The Buffalo Bills are going to bring him to camp. They're going to cut him late August. They're going to put him on the practice squad. If somebody gets hurt, awesome. He now has a spot on the 53 and he can contribute, and the Buffalo Bills feel safe that they have that option there on the practice squad. Option number two is, listen, Damian Harris sat out on the free agency wire for a long time. It's not exactly like he was the belle of the ball in free agency. It's not exactly like he's without his warts as a running back. Same with Latavius Murray. His age kept him in free agency for a long time. Damian Harris's contract does not preclude the Buffalo Bills from cutting him. If Latavius Murray beats him out in camp, I think they could roll with three running backs, and one of those being Latavius Murray, not Damian Harris. Or the third way in which this could play out is, as some of these guys have mentioned, the Buffalo Bills could legitimately see Latavius Murray as an archetype they want in that running back room, that big bruising power back, and they could make room for all four guys, a role for all four guys. Likely one of them will be inactive every week, depending on situational football and situations like that. But I think that is also an option. So those are like the three ways I think it could play out. But Latavius Murray at his age, still very good. These are both really, really quality signings. And that's what you get for being a good football team. Solid players want to come win a chip with you. They'll take discounts. Not so much Latavius Murray, more Poona Ford. But who knows? Now go get your edge rusher.
Agreed completely with all your points, gentlemen. Fantastic show today. I really appreciate everyone's input, and for you, both Thomas and Judge, for joining me at the last minute. For you, Mike, who agreed to do this. You guys were awesome today. This was a lot of fun. I want to ask one more question before we sign off for this week, and that is, are you pumped about this new stadium getting started? Are we excited to see a brand new facility in Orchard Park? Like, what are the thoughts? What's the vibe with this, Judge? I'll start with you. We'll go reverse order before we go.
See, this is so weird for me because I was a 10-year season ticket holder from 2006 to 2016 before I moved out here to Arizona. So a lot of memories in I always call it the Ralph Wilson Stadium. And we were having this conversation in the Cover One group chat. Like, sort of, it just kind of recently hit me that maybe like I maybe have less than maybe like 10 Buffalo Bills home games like left in my lifetime that I'm going to be able to go to living out here on the West Coast now. Not expected to move back to Buffalo, but to me, from further afar, I don't really have too much skin in the game in terms of the stadium. I'm excited there's a new stadium. I'm excited that it'll be better experience for the fans. I'm excited that it secures the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo for a long time. I'm excited that it makes us a little bit more relevant. It makes us a little closer to our big market counterparts. But I'm also not looking forward to the toxic environment that the cost of tickets are going to create once this stadium is built, because even though the tickets will still be affordable, even though they will still be nothing, pennies compared to some of these other football teams, you will get a large number of people who will no longer be able to afford their season tickets, who will no longer be able to afford to go to games. They're going to be really upset, and rightfully so. But at the end of the day, the market is what the market is, and you have more options than ever to watch the game on television. So I'm not looking forward to whatever's going to unfold once the ticket prices and the seat licensing conversations get kicking into gear around 2026.
So I am a season ticket holder with my wife. We have 4 seats, and right now we spend $5,000 on the seats and $250 on the parking pass. Let's just say this. When they did the survey, they said it was going to be $7,000 a piece for each PSL, and our season tickets were going to go up $2,500. That's a lot, especially for 2 new parents who have a 3-month-old son. Love the idea of the new stadium. Love the idea of the piss troughs going away. I think there's some incredible. I know, Judge, relax.
I'm with you on that. Hate the piss troughs.
Yeah,
whoa. That's history right there.
I know. Yeah, well, you could take one. You could put it in your house if you want to. I think it's great. I think, the stadium now is dilapidated. It's in rough shape. If you've been to it recently, it's not fun. One day of the Patriots game, the cold weather playoff game a year and a half ago, everybody was so bundled up you couldn't get through the concourse because it was so. I mean, everybody was wide. It was like the Michelin Man. I think it's awesome. I think we're heading for a new era of the Buffalo Bills, no pun intended. And I mean, you saw last season, our stadium is so antiquated and archaic that the runners for the wiring for the cameras that they have snapped. So now that we have a stadium that's going to be able to be utilized for these type of events, but going forward, I think is great. I think it is tough. I agree with Judge, man. The pricing is going to be really difficult on a lot of people. But unfortunately, I think that's just the cost of doing business. We've been very fortunate for a long time to go to games. And you know what? I hate to say this, folks, and I'm just going to be this guy. You want to complain about the prices being expensive now? Guess what? You could have gotten them for a pack of Newports and nobody went to the games before. So you are a stud quarterback for a long time. You're going to pay a lot of money to go to a new stadium. At the same time, it's tough. I see both sides of the battle. It's going to be sad. Judge, if you want to come to a game before the stadium closes, let me know.
Thanks.
I'm thrilled about the new stadium. I've been waiting for this for 20 years because while a lot of people on Cover One were all about the X's and O's, the film and everything, I've always kind of been concerned. I'm going to be 32 this year. I was concerned my entire teenage years. What's going to happen to the team? Like, am I even going to have a team when I'm 40 years old, 50 years old, and something to share? And I, as someone that like was in the broadcasting field for a little while and the journalism side of things, I was following very closely when the Bills Toronto series was going on and trying to figure out like, what does this mean for the future? I know then the London stuff started happening. People would always talk about the Bills being one of the teams that could relocate to LA. And really, Ralph Wilson saved the team by writing the provisions he did into their final lease at the Ralph to basically make it very difficult for any new prospective owner to buy the team and want to move them, with the clause that they really couldn't move the team within the first 7 years, and there was a huge buyout as well in that process. So when Pagula bought it, a lot of people just assumed team was safe. That's good. We'll just stay in the stadium. No need for a change. I always felt this was an inevitability. I love the nostalgia of Highmark Stadium. It's fun. Like, I will always enjoy going to games there and tailgating, and I'll miss it when it's gone. But having gone to Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, having gone to not even like the mega palaces of stadiums, but seeing other nice, decent stadiums, it's just so outdated. And I'm not saying that comfort is the number one thing I care about when I go to a Bills game. Like, I care about the team winning, and I get it. Buffalo fans are blue collar. We want to see good product on the field, and we like to talk about, we're not like the LA fans. We're not like the fans in Atlanta or Miami. But after 50 years of being in the stadium, I want to be able to be somewhat comfortable when I go to a game. I went to an MLS game in Columbus recently, and they have a $300 million, 20,000 seat stadium. The fact that blew me away compared to my experiences going to a Bills game is mind-boggling to me. Like, an MLS stadium with 20,000 people had more amenities than I've seen in my entire life at Ralph Wilson Stadium. And just discuss how old the Ralph is. When they were building that, they were bragging about having carpeted suites that had air conditioning and televisions in it. Like, it was good at the time, but it's been outdated. And personally, if we, quite frankly, if we weren't Buffalo, we would have gotten a new stadium 20 years ago because that's how it works. And I know a lot of people are debating about, should it be a dome? Should it be open air? Should it be in Buffalo or Orchard Park? I wish it was a dome. I wish it was in Buffalo, but you hear Ron Raccuia talk about it. It simply came down to, we need to get this approved. We need the state to actually be able to give us money. And at the end of the day, our fans don't want to pay the taxes, and they don't want to pay the PSLs of what a $2.5 billion downtown stadium is. So I think everybody is going to kind of win at the end of the day. We're going to be more comfortable when we go to games. We're going to have, we're going to be protected from some of the crazy elements, the wind, the precipitation for the most part. We're still going to have our tailgating. We're still going to have our normal routines. The Bills are still going to be really good. And we did it at the most cost efficient way possible. And like you said, Judge and Tom, I'll be done with this shortly. It sucks that when you build something like this, that there is going to be a portion of our fan base that is going to be priced out from going to games. That really does suck. And that has been the greatest thing about our stadium, is that it didn't matter if you were a college-age kid or any neighborhood, you could go to games. And my season tickets right now are $750 a seat, $1,500 total. I'm probably going to have to pay double that for whatever my seats are for the new stadium. But at some point in time, you have to accept this is the NFL in 2023. You either play the game that the bigwigs do, or you don't have a team. And unfortunately, this is basically what the Bills have to do to secure their future in the city.
All right. Well, yeah, I'm excited too, guys. And I understand the gripes with the pricing. Obviously, when it's such a drastic increase, it's going to alienate a lot of people. Unfortunately, with the just how expensive this is going to be and the modern NFL, it's not surprising that they're going this route, but I hope that people are still able to get to games, because I'm certainly excited to see what this facility is going to look like. And to answer one final question that was posed to us, what is the stadium name going to be? Well, I'm happy to report my sources have indicated to me that it's going to be called Chris Kepner Stadium. So be on the lookout for that. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap it up this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Under Review. You were all wonderful. Again, leave a like on this video, subscribe to Cover One, follow every one of us on Twitter. We're all delights and totally optimistic all the time. Gentlemen, I'll give you a chance to plug what you got one more time, then we're going to get out of here. Mike, you go first. We'll go around.
Sorry, I just cut out. I missed the last thing you said.
Oh, I apologize. Just plug whatever you got going on.
Going Deep podcast every Tuesday night at 7 on Cover One YouTube page. You can follow me, Mike_Bunt. I do it with Kevin Masseri and producer AJ. Hopefully, producer AJ will be with us for a lot longer to come, but graduating college, don't know how much longer he'll be able to stick on depending on his work situation. But tune in, because we might not have him for much longer.
Yeah, guys, appreciate you guys all tuning in. All of Cover One's content. My show, Buffalo Late Night, as you can see behind me, every Thursday night, 9 p.m. This week it'll be at 8 p.m. We're going to have a scheduled release live reaction show. Ridiculous name. There'll be a whole bunch of us, a gaggle of interesting human beings. I hope you guys tune in. And as always, I say this on my show. Guys, enjoy this. Enjoy what we're in. We're in a great time to be a Buffalo sports fan, with the Sabres becoming good. The Bills are really good. Live in the moment. Don't worry about what's going to happen outside of it. Just enjoy this. Enjoy this while you're in it, because, man, it's fleeting.
My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me. You follow me on the Bills Guys account at the Bills Guys. You don't want to follow me on my personal account. I just complain about the Phoenix Suns 95% of the time on that account. But show is the Air Raid Hour. Me and my better half, Dave Tilton, every Monday night, 9 p.m. We love the offseason. We're all in on free agency, the draft, and over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be deconstructing the Buffalo Bills opponents. We're going to be deconstructing all the different position groups, and we're going to be sort of setting ourselves up for training camp in July. So you can catch us every Monday at 9 p.m. here on the Cover One Sports Network. And just, how about smash that like before you head out for Joe? And if you really like this show, I always say the same thing on our show. Hit that share button, copy the link, and send it to somebody you think might appreciate these type of awesome conversations that he has every Saturday. Word of mouth goes a long way. So a text, an email to a family, a friend, anyone who's a Bills fan who might enjoy this will go a long way. And Joe certainly deserves it. So thank you, Joe, for having us on this morning. I'm used to saying this morning.
Well, it's morning for you. It's afternoon over here. I approve of carrier pigeon as well, if you want to use that route to share my show. Guys, thank you so much. To all of you in the chat, thank you so much. Please leave a like, share this video. This was such a fun discussion. I've had a blast this week. And for all of you, I'll be back next week, 11 a.m. Follow me on Twitter at @show_DeRosa for sports takes and occasional music takes you don't care about, because you probably never heard of the band. I am signing off along with everyone here, but thank you all so much. Again, be good to one another, as Anthony says. I will see you all very soon, and go Bills.
Go Bills.